Series this morning called Ghost of Christmas Past. Now, before you get all psyched out, and it's not a spooky series, but we're going to be talking about some stuff that hinders us as we go into the holiday season. Let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed that the holiday season is a time that really magnifies things? Even the smallest things can just get big. Have you noticed that? I know, like, at our house, there's no other time of the year when, if lights are not working, it's no big deal. I mean, we just like, okay, lights don't work, no. Christmas comes, and if a string of lights doesn't work, it's a big deal at our house, okay? Well, we won't even go into that. But anyway, it's big. Things get big during the holidays. Things are magnified during the holidays. It's no big deal, but, you can burn a meal. But if you burn a meal in the holidays, it's a big deal. It's like, what are we going to do? Company comes over to the house, no big deal. Just come in, make yourself at home. Company during the holidays. Boy, everything's got to be spotless, clean. I mean, it's a big deal. The holidays can magnify stuff, and a lot of good stuff. It can magnify the generosity and the love and all that goes with this time of the season. It can magnify that, but it can also magnify the bad and the difficult times. And what might seem a little painful during the year can be incredibly painful during Christmas time or the holiday season. For example, loneliness. People experience loneliness, but during the holiday season, that's magnified when they begin to see families gathering and friends gathering and having a great time. It just seems to magnify the loneliness in their life. Depression. We can get depressed during the year and experience degrees of depression, but during the holidays, it just magnifies it. It gets bigger as we see people all joyful and excited, and they're just all, up on this high, and it makes our depression seem bigger. And we could go on and on. The hurts, the offenses, the abuse somehow seems more real and more tender during the holiday season than any other time. Some carry pains and they carry hurts from Christmas to Christmas, and they never really enjoy freedom and the joy and the peace of the holiday season. It's often at this time of the year, I don't know whether it's the holidays or it's the end of the year, but we become so haunted by things from our past that we never are really able to enjoy the holidays and what it really means. So today we're going to talk about one of these ghosts that tends to haunt us, especially this time of year. And that particular ghost is overcoming offenses. Overcoming offenses. How many knows someone who's easily offended? Raise your hand. You know someone who's easily offended. How many of you know that if they knew you raised your hand, they would be offended, right? I mean, they're like, they said, I can't believe they did that. We all know someone who's easily offended. How many of you would say that you are easily offended? I didn't think any hands would go up. Because, in fact, you're offended that I would even ask that question, right? That you would be offended. I mean, that's offensive, right? How many would honestly say that I tend to get more offended than I should? Could we agree on that one? It's hard to admit that, isn't it? It's hard to admit, but we let the little things weigh us down, offend us, and it's like, the best example I know, you're sitting in a line of traffic, and, somebody's trying to get into that line, and you actually stop and actually we're like this, and we're like, and they get in, and they pull right out, and they don't even give you the customary, nod or the half pageant wave, you know what I'm talking about? They don't even acknowledge that you let them in, and you're like, I can't believe that. I just let them in this traffic, and we kind of get offended. We did something a couple of weeks ago, the Friday after Thanksgiving, Black Friday. We all piled in the car, and we went to Columbus. I don't know what we were thinking. Actually, we were not thinking, probably. But we went up there, and we were in these stores, and I'm like, I will pay triple the price if we can just get out of here. It's just crowd. Everybody's bumping into each other, and all this. And we go to a shoe store, and as Maria and Whitney walked in the shoe store, and I saw these two young ladies walking up, so I just stayed at the door, held the door open, and they come, chippering in, and both of them looked at me and they go, thank you, and the mom was behind them. She was about 10 feet, or so behind them. And so I just stayed there till she got there. I waited, and she finally come up, and she come through the door, never acknowledged. She's like the queen mother of the earth or something, and she never even looked at me. She never even said thank you. She didn't do anything, and I was a little offended, to be honest with you. Traffic is not my strong suit. I get offended in traffic. We won't even go there. But maybe for you, you're talking to somebody and they're on the phone. Does that hit home? You're just talking and they're like, yeah, and they're doing their thing on the phone. Or how about this one? You post something on social media and they don't like it. You like everything they post. You comment on it, you like it, you put the LOLs and the little smiley faces, and you comment on everything and like everything they post, and they did not even acknowledge your post. We get a little offended, don't we? Well, I can't believe that. I'm going to unlike all the stuff that I like from them. And then we have the whole family gathering stuff at Christmas and holidays, We won't even, I think that's enough said, family stuff. Sometimes you get together and somebody will say something. They'll say, you need to do something with your kids. Or I don't like the way you're handling your kids. And buddy, it's ding! I don't care if it's Christmas or not, it's game on, okay? It's no hold bar, it's round one, and it starts, just back and forth. You comment, the comments that are made at family gatherings, they'll comment about you. They'll comment about your love life. They'll talk about, the food. They'll talk about the gifts, and it goes on and on and on. Things tend to magnify during the holiday season. It's interesting, especially around the holidays, that the littlest things can set us off in the biggest ways. A time that's supposed to be Christ-honoring often becomes destructive. And it'll haunt us from Christmas to Christmas. The little annoying things. But the reality is there are some significant hurts and wounds that emerge this time of year. And for some, you've been betrayed in a very significant way. For some of you, you've been lied to. Some of you have been abused. Some of you, you're going into family situations over the holidays in a very, very dysfunctional family where there's a lot of hurt and a lot of past associated with this family. And the challenge is often when we're offended is that we let these offenses seep into our hearts and overcome our attitudes. And all of a sudden we have families that are divided, friendships that are ended, and the entire holiday season and the gatherings are completely destroyed. Here's my prayer this morning. My prayer is that we go into this time that we're supposed to be honoring the birth of a Savior, and that we open gifts often with a closed heart. But my prayer is that we'll open our hearts. I hope that we don't celebrate the love of Christ by hating someone that we're called to love. That we never really enjoy the grace of God without extending the grace of God to the people around us. So I want to start today with a statement, which I think is a very powerful statement, is life is too short and your calling is too great to live offended. Life is too short and your calling is too great to live life offended. Think about it. Life is short. The scripture even talks about it. It says life is like a mist. It's here for a moment and then it disappears. And we're only here for a little while. Life passes by quickly. If you don't believe me, look at your kids. Look how they grow. Look at your grandkids and how quick the time goes by. And if you still don't believe me, look in the mirror, okay? Life goes by quick. It's fast. My calling is too great. But guess what? Your calling is too great. Your calling is too great to live life offended. Because you see, all of us, we're called to go into the world, preach the gospel. We're called to go into the world and be the light, be the salt of the earth. We're called to go out and reflect the love of Jesus, to be His hands and to be His feet in this earth and to show His love. I don't know about you, but my life is too short and my calling is too great to be offended by something small. So what I want to do this morning is I just want to take a verse and we're going to unpack this and talk about it, but it's found in Proverbs 19:11, and it says this: a person's wisdom yields patience, and it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. And let me just say this: to overlook an offense is not to pretend it didn't happen. Stuff happens. We can't deny it. We can't just brush over it and say, well, I'm just going to act like it never happened. That's not what he's talking about here. It's not just acting like it didn't or pretending it didn't happen. To overlook a fault, to overlook an offense, is simply to make a conscious decision that I will let it go. I will let it go. In other words, it's a form of forgiveness. It's a choice. It's a real-time decision that I'm going to rise above this, and I'm going to choose in the moment not to let this get into my heart. It's to one's glory to pass over an offense, to get above it, to rise above it spiritually, get closer to God. I love a quote by Renee Descartes. She said this. She said, there it is. She said, whenever anyone has offended me, I try to raise my soul so high the offense can't reach it. When someone offends me, I try to raise my soul so high that the offense can't reach it. Why? Because life's too short. My calling is too great to let something small distract me from something big God has called me to do. I want to unpack two thoughts this morning about this, and the first one is this: with God's help, I'm going to get over being easily offended. With God's help, I'm going to get over being easily offended. We find in Ephesians 4:2, he said, always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other. There it is, making allowance for each other's faults. Making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Let me ask you this: how many know someone who is perfect? Or let me rephrase that. How many know someone who thinks they're perfect? Yeah. What's interesting is that we often tend to judge other people by their actions. And what do we do with ourselves? We tend to judge ourselves by our intentions, don't we? Judge others by the way they act. We judge ourselves by our... In other words, we're saying, well, I didn't mean to do that. When it's us, it's, I didn't mean to do that. I mean, you know my heart, right? You know my heart. Give me the benefit of the doubt. I mean, give me some slack here. Cut me some slack. Nobody's perfect. Here's what we need to recognize is that when someone else has a bad day, when someone else has a bad response, when someone else might seem uncaring, unkind, unfriendly, short, inattentive, lacking empathy, their bad response is not all about you. It's not. That bad driving is not an attempt to offend you and to ruin your day. That snarly remark they made, it's not about you. The fact that they walked fast past me when I opened the door and didn't even acknowledge me, it was not about me. I doubt very seriously that woman went home that evening and she goes, whoa, I showed that man, didn't I? I just walked right through that door and I didn't even acknowledge him, didn't even acknowledge that he opened the door for him. It was not about me. Whenever someone is short with you, let's ask ourselves this question: I wonder what they're going through. I wonder where they're hurting. When someone's a little bit rude, when someone is a little bit judgmental, I need to have compassion for them. Instead of taking offense, I want to have the attitude of Christ. And with God's help, I'm going to make allowance for other people's faults. I'm overcoming being easily offended. I've got too much to do and I've got too short of time to do it in to let offenses slow me down. So I'm getting over being easily offended. And the second one is I'm getting over, with God's help, I'm getting over the big offenses. Now I just want to stop here for a moment, because there's some people, probably some in this room, I know some in this room, that are here this morning and you have some significant wounds in your life right now. I know that for a lot of you, especially during this time of season, it stirs up those betrayals, those hurts, those lies, that abuse that you've experienced and you've had to endure in your life. And I just want to say this, that whatever you've experienced, the hurt and the pain that you've experienced, I just first want to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've had to experience that. I'm sorry that someone has hurt you or wounded you or deeply betrayed you. I'm so sorry for that. I wish it would have never happened. And I'm not trying to glaze over all this morning. I just want you to know I'm sorry that it happened to you. But with that being said, when we have been hurt, when we have been wounded, we have a choice. We have a choice. We can rehearse what happened, and that's what we often do, isn't it? When we get hurt, we go around saying, well, they said, and she said, and he did, and they did this, and we rehearse that hurt, and we let it go over and over in our mind. And what happens is it feeds the bitterness and the anger, and it drives the dislike deeper into our own hearts. It's like ripping a scab off and hoping it will heal. And we keep ripping the scab off, and it never actually has time to heal. So we can rehearse it, or with God's help and grace, we can start to release it. We can rehearse it, or we can release it. You see, forgiveness is a process, and sometimes it may take some time, but we continue to seek God. We continue to press into Him. We continue to do the right things and seek to do the right things. And His Holy Spirit can actually start to change our hearts and our lives. I love Colossians 3 in verse 13. He said, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, this is so big, remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. He's saying, hey, in the middle of all your hurt, in the middle of all your pain, he said, don't forget that the Lord forgave you. And he said, so you must forgive others. But how? How do we forgive someone that seems unforgivable? How do we forgive something that was so wrong, so brutal, so horrific? How do we forgive? And he says, you forgive as the Lord forgave you. Now, I don't know how this translates for your life. I can only speak for mine, of how this verse translates, what this means. But if I look at the whole span of my life, I see that there's been a lot of places in my life, times that I have let people down, times that I have hurt people, times that I haven't been totally honest, times that I've blatantly done the wrong thing, and times that I've just sinned against God. I've been forgiven a lot. A lot. How do I forgive somebody that seems unforgivable? I forgive them the same way that I have been forgiven. Freely I've been forgiven, and he said I'm to freely forgive others. You see, it's a process. God, help me. God, help me forgive. Change my heart. God, give me a grace. The grace you've given me, help me to extend that grace to others. God, I pray for this person, even though I don't want to and I don't like it. God, help me. Because it's a choice. It's a choice. The very thing that's holding me back has been holding me back for so long. It'll hold me back no more because I'm choosing to let it go. I'm choosing to rise above it. I'm not going to let this offense hold me back because my life is too short and my calling is too great. I'm not rehearsing this, but I'm releasing this. a very interesting story in the Old Testament. Story of Joseph and his brothers. An amazing story of someone rising above betrayal. His older brothers, they hated him. They were critical of him. They betrayed him. They abused him. He was a victim of the slave trade. They falsely imprisoned him, and there was more abuse added to that. And finally, he's in a prison, and Pharaoh has a dream, and they remember that Joseph was able to interpret dreams. So they send for him, and he goes before Pharaoh, and he tells him, he says, hey, there's going to be a famine in the land, and let me lay out a plan for you. Here's how you're going to survive the famine. And he lays out the plan, and it works great, and Pharaoh promotes him to second in command of all of Egypt. He has finally gone from the pit that he was thrown into a dungeon, and now he's ascended to the second highest position in the land of Egypt. Years pass. And Joseph's brothers, who thinks he's dead and gone now, his brothers show up for the food distribution program there in Egypt that Joseph happens to be running. As they walk in, Joseph immediately recognizes his brothers. When they walked in, he was like, the very ones who have caused me such hurt and such pain and abused me, and he just goes to sold me out. I mean, the ones who left me for dead. He recognizes his brothers when they walk in the door. And if Joseph had done what many of us do and some are doing right now, and he would just been rehearsing this whole thing all these years, if he had just been sitting around all these years going, boy, just one day, you just let me find them, just one day. Then I'll say to them, then I'll get my pound of flesh. Then I'll get my revenge. And if that's what Joseph had done, the story would have ended much different than it actually did. But Joseph, by the grace of God, he chose not to rehearse, but to release. And when he revealed himself to his brothers, when he said, hey, I am Joseph, your brother. And they were like, we're dead. Oh gosh, we are, we're done. We're hit, lights out for us. And he goes, no. He said, you don't understand. You don't understand. And what he tells them is this. He said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. He used it for good. I believe for some this morning, God's going to do a work in you, in your heart, and you're no longer going to be haunted by something in your past. That you're going to leave here in just a moment saying, with God's help, I'm getting over it. With God's help, I'm releasing it. And you're going to walk out of here just practicing that. With God's help, I'm releasing it. I'm getting over it. And then one day you're going to discover with God's goodness and with God's grace, you're going to say, hey, I'm over it. I'm over it. I let it go. What used to hold me back, it is not holding me any longer. What used to hurt me in the past, God has used to conform me to the image of Christ. What weighed me down for years is not holding me down any longer. I'm over it. It's to your glory to overlook and to rise above an offense, to not be held hostage by some offense. Why? Why is that? Because our life is too short and our calling is too great to live life offended. You see, it's a big difference. And I mean, if we're honest and we're real this morning, the big offenses, how do we forgive those? We simply forgive the same way that we have been forgiven. Because here's the thing, and I hope you'll get this morning, this last statement. When we forgive, it doesn't change what happened in the past. But it does change what God can do in the future. When we forgive, it doesn't change what happened in the past. Is the past. It can't be changed. But what it does do is it changes what God can do in your future. We overlook an offense because our lives are too short and our calling is too great to live life offended. What a great reminder. In just a moment, the guys are going to bring communion. And band, you can go ahead and come up. And we're going to partake of communion. But what a great reminder of overlooking an offense that we have in Jesus Christ Himself. Listen to this. Christ was on the cross. He is suspended between heaven and earth, and He's on the cross, and the ones who had mocked Him, the ones who had betrayed Him, the ones who had spit on Him, the ones who had beat Him with whips, the ones who had called Him names, the ones who were pointing their fingers at Him, the ones that drove spikes into His hands and into His feet. He's hanging between heaven and earth with all these people around Him and all the bad and abuse they had done to Him. And what does He do? He's hanging there in pain on a cross, and He says, Father, forgive them. They don't even realize what they're doing. Talk about overlooking an offense. He was literally offering His life for His offenders. He was dying to save them. And as we partake of communion in just a moment, as we do this, let's be reminded that our offenses, my offenses, cost Christ His life. My little indiscretions, my little dishonesty, my sins cost Jesus Christ His life. So yes, I have been forgiven much. And in light of what I have been forgiven, in light of that forgiveness that He's offered me, I'm called to extend that same forgiveness to those who offend me.